Well, I was going to say I was, dreading following Bruno because he's obviously, but you've made it a lot easier by telling that terrible joke. I'm feeling a lot more upbeat about things. So yeah, so my name's Doug. This is my second ever public speaking appearance. So bear with me a little bit. This is my introductory slide. I was told by experienced people that it needs to be simple and clear and full of possibility. I think I've achieved that. So a little bit about myself before I get into the sort of the guts of it. So yeah, I've been in a few roles in a few places over the years, and I've from development through architecture, team leading, even sort of a stint as CTO not that long ago. And I've had quite a lot of hands-on cloud experience in small, medium, and even quite large companies. In my last job, for example, I migrated the entire company off a combination of 10-year-old tin and sort of a virtualization solution onto Amazon Web Services. The costs were cut by 75%. A good success story, good reliability, the ability to have a DR scenario for the first time, and it was done in a couple of weeks, which is extraordinary. We won't dwell on it too much. There were special circumstances, most of which being it wasn't a huge company, and I was given free rein to do what I wanted because I was the CTO. That doesn't, that won't apply to anyone here, I don't think. So we won't dwell on it. Let's find this. Cool, so 3 years ago, joined a state-owned enterprise called Kordia. Kordia is an old company. You may or may not have heard of it, but you've certainly used it whenever you turn on your TV, for example, or find yourself lost at sea. Kordia services will be working for you. We're also a B2B telco, and our latest foray is into cybersecurity, where we're probably New Zealand's leading player already, having acquired Aura information security. So within that context, I lead a team of 10 to 15 developers at any one time, and we look after 130 different systems, not 130 different VMs or 130 different servers, but 130 different architected systems with different operating systems, different software, different vendors, different places. So it's a hell of a lot of different stuff. And we run this stuff on a combination of VMs and all kinds of bespoke hardware. So this is kind of a rich history of operating systems and architecture, sort of a heritage which I have to look after. So I'm going to tell you a story now about sort of an environment and a culture, and tell me if any of this sort of resonates with you. I think some of it may do. All right, so we run a virtualized environment at Kordia and at other places I've worked, virtualization. And typically this will take the sort of the form of a VMware stack or a Hyper-V stack or something along those lines. And it sort of, when we talk about culture, it breeds a sort of it has deep effects. Just that one decision has a huge sort of knock-on effect, and it affects things like licensing. As soon as you start using, a virtualization platform like VMware, you're sort of stuck into some licensing, and you kind of you then get into maintenance. So it's not going to look after itself. You need to maintain the virtualization and the hypervisor layers. Upgrades happen. You have to look after that. Hardware as well as the hypervisor. Refreshes. Who likes those projects? Hardware refreshes. Nobody has put their hand up. And also you need a lot of people to run this stuff. When things go wrong, you need people there to make them right again. So again, in terms of the culture, we end up looking after what are effectively 10 pets. We know them all. We know where our data centers are. We know what the machines sort of look like, sound like. We know how warm they are. We know the VMs by name. So for example, LinDBP04 happens to be a server name that I know in my head, and that's completely bizarre. No one should have to know that. And we're kind of conditioned over a period of time within an organization to kind of accept and expect a certain cost and a certain difficulty when doing anything in computing. And we actually go to the extent of having projects to kind of keep feeding this cycle, to keep these things going, refreshing them, reinventing them. And the interesting thing is, culturally, it breeds a sort of inertia when it comes to thinking of other ways of doing this, of maybe moving to cloud computing. So you get this idea of, it's our stuff. We know where it is. We sort of like it. It keeps the room warm. I don't really want to know about anything else. So take a look at this guy. I know this man. He's called Andrew Wilson. I'm illustrating a point here. Look at his eyes. Look how, he loves that thing. He loves what he's touching. He loves hugging that, to be honest, and it's deeply ingrained in a lot of companies' cultures, I think. But Kordia, we hug our stuff more than most. We're deeply rooted in New Zealand. Literally, we've got masts on the top of all the high sites around the country. We are a hardware company, so you can kind of understand it and forgive it to some extent. So at the beginning of this story, I mentioned virtualization, and I think some of us in the room will remember when that was kind of new. That was almost cool. You didn't have to use the bare operating system on a box. You could have lots of different operating systems on it. It was kind of new and cool. It's not new anymore, and it's not cool anymore, and it certainly isn't the cloud. So I don't know if you're familiar with the NIST, but they have there's a de facto sort of cloud computing definition that they have published, and there are 5 essential characteristics. And I'm going to quickly step through them. I won't labour on them, but I'll explain why VMware and the like are not the cloud. So on-demand self-service is one of the essential characteristics. Do we have on-demand self-service? No, we don't. We have to get people to do things. I have to get my team to ask other people in other teams to do things for this infrastructure. Broad network access. In our case, and probably in some of your cases, deliberately not. The infrastructure is kept, quite private, and we have to go through hoops if we want things to be publicly accessible. We can't just define firewall rules ourselves. Resource pooling is about separation of concerns and workloads. And while we think we might have it with, for example, VMware, it turns out that in reality we need to pin certain workloads that have certain demands on the hardware. So it kind of sort of disintegrates a little bit, and then we don't. As soon as we do that, we don't have we don't have the same capability with DR because we haven't set up the same pinning on our DR site, for example. The next one is rapid elasticity. Can we expand this thing forever? Keep it, and start, having huge VMs and loads of storage? No, we run out, and we have. It's gone. So we need to buy more tin and do more of that server hugging. And then the last one is something called measured service, which of course is very familiar in cloud land, but do we have it? Well, we don't even know what it is really. So no. So I went around the New Zealand market, much like Catalyst did those years ago, and I was looking for a cloud provider, and I wanted to have something which met those sort of characteristics and that was going to give me what I wanted. That was something familiar from my AWS, heyday, when I was really enjoying that kind of thing. And nobody does it, and that is true. They're not just making this stuff up. I've checked, and I've gone to all the providers. And the reason, I guess I wanted to briefly explain what, some of the critical things why, Kordia chose Catalyst Cloud as a cloud provider. And they're really simple. One of them, have you got public pricing? Yes. Public documentation, public APIs, and also a single focused cloud product. Not sort of lots of flavors depending on who you are and how much you want to pay and that kind of stuff. It's I guess a bunch of simplicity and openness. So I've got quite a few more of those if you want to talk about them afterwards, but I won't go through them all now. But effectively, it's that sort of that openness and that willingness to engage and provide protections against vendor lock-in as well. So open compute, if I wanted to pull out my workloads from Catalyst Cloud and put them on another OpenStack provider, I can. Same APIs, exactly the same. So we started an experiment at Kordia. So I wanted to put a toe in the water and see how things go. And the Kordia, we've started rewriting our new Kordia portal, which is our customer portal that all of our customers have to see their services, their throughput, all that kind of stuff on our network. And although I've seen this stuff before and I like it, and the reason why I did this, none of my developers had to the same extent. So suddenly, Bruno was talking about when disasters happen. Let's forget that stuff. We'll talk about all the good stuff now. Infrastructure as code. This is something quite new. So we have in our version control a definition of not just our software, but actually how it's deployed, all of the networking, security groups, everything. We can effectively run a command and bring up a real customer service. That sort of segues into the idea of DevOps. So our developers are operating and supporting all of the software and all of the infrastructure, for that matter, from their point of view, without having to get other teams involved and without the sort of the slowdowns that causes. Have you heard of immutable infrastructure? It's where you deploy something and never touch it. You never log into it. You can't log into it. It's so it stops this sort of midnight heroes that go in and sort of go in, or maybe villains who go in and change something just to make it work slightly differently and tweak stuff. And then you come to, if you lose it and then bring it back, is it the same? You don't know. But with immutable infrastructure, you've always got exactly the same thing because it's guaranteed. Again, a great benefit. We kind of ruled out the possibility of cock-ups by people logging in. We have Jenkins test slaves doing continuous integration. We bring them up at night, we run them, we shut them down. Haven't been able to do that before. Unlimited computing resources. That sounds good. We've really enjoyed that, actually. When you reach hard limits on your own hardware, you start going, shit, we actually have to stop an important business process here. We have to stop a project. We have to stop revenue streams. Being able to expand, effectively with that limit has been great for us. And the real cream of this is we don't have to worry about the hardware or the hypervisor or firmware or hardware refreshes or licensing or support contracts. We pay per hour that we use a resource, which is really, really good. I wanted to quickly go into something called red-black deployment. This is the most, I want to give you a slight bit of technical stuff here. It's not that technical. But it's a strategy for zero downtime. And we use this in our customer portal right now in production. So I'm showing you at the bottom of the screen some of the tooling that we use that is quite appropriate for the cloud in particular. So Jenkins continuous integration tool builds Debian packages when code is committed and testing passes. We use Ansible to orchestrate the deployment of the software and also the infrastructure. So every time we do a build, we create new networks, new security groups, new rules, new hosts, and then install the software. And then after we've installed it, Sentry detects whether we've buggered it up, basically. If users start getting errors, we see those errors. Red-black deployment allows us to have zero downtime when we do an upgrade. So we build a brand new version. It goes onto the Catalyst Cloud, version 1.1. The old version 1.0 is still connected to the floating IP. When we've done our preliminary tests against that version 1.1, we just repoint that floating IP at the new version. And we keep version 1 around for a bit in case something has gone wrong. But eventually, we delete it forever. It's gone. If we want to bring it back, we know that we can. We just go back to the same version that we had, and we know that nothing will be different. It's not dependent on humans. Next version comes along, we do exactly the same thing. And that continues forever. Okay, so it's been a journey for me and for Kordia. Doing this stuff in a big company is tricky. You actually do have to deal with the culture side of things a lot more. There are a few different angles to moving to the cloud. One is certainly very business focused, and it's about costs and it's about contracts and maybe about some of your company structure, how you're resourced up. And the other parts are technical, and I've spoken a bit about some of the joys of working with the cloud, which make it very compelling for technical people. If you put Bruno in front of your development team, they'll soon be wanting to use Catalyst Cloud straight away. It's a pretty easy sell. It's harder to do with the other side of things, with the business side of things, I've found. Okay, I've got a bad analogy. Are you ready for this? It's much worse than your joke. Okay, so check this out. So this is this year's America's Cup boats. Sailing is a contest between wind and water. They're totally separate forces. but the boat brings those forces together, a focal point to produce movement. And of course, you've got someone on the helm, and you've got guys on the sheets changing the sails. They're different people, different skills, doing different things, but they have a common purpose, which is to go faster in the best direction. So I found it to be quite similar with the cloud, because technical people alone can't change a company to use the cloud. They might see all the good benefits and good reasons, but unless you can get business people on board and the same to reach the same objectives, you'll totally fail. If you start turning the tiller and the sails haven't changed, you're going to broach, or you're going to pitch bowl, or you're going to do all kinds of crazy shit maneuvers. So getting the different people with different motivations sort of together to understand the same direction is really important. So there's my really terrible analogy, but it's pretty awesome anyway. So yeah, that's mostly me.